Thank you, Donna. Our apologies for the music. This is an ongoing dialogue with Kiss the Sky. Our next writer is John Drake. He is a part-time writer and musician and a full-time financial advisor and father. He has a degree in creative writing from Knox College and an MBA from the Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. He lives in Naperville and is a founding member of the Risky Rooster Band. John's writings have appeared practically nowhere and are recognized by practically no one, but that doesn't seem to efface him in the least. Welcome, John.
Yeah! Thank you very much. I like the Beatles, so I'm going to just kind of listen while... And that's all we had years ago, right, was vinyl. You know, some stories are truer than others, and this one seems pretty true to me. A lot of my work is centered around water. I don't know why, it just is, and particularly rivers of the Midwest. This one is called That's How It Is in This Life. The last time Ted saw his son, the boy had just turned 1. It was an early Sunday afternoon. 37 other Sunday afternoons had passed since his wife had moved out in the middle of the night, taking their infant son with her. Her mother, one of her sisters, and a friend from their church had come to get her and the baby. Each Sunday afterwards, he would drive the 90 miles from his hometown where they had lived together to hers, the town she was from and where her family lived, to see his son, to hold him, to talk to him, to play with him, all under the supervision of his wife and her family. The visits lasted about 2 hours if there wasn't any yelling. After the visit, he would get in his car and drive home along the 2-lane highway that connected the towns. There was a rest area built by the WPA near the halfway point, with 2 picnic tables, a water pump atop a well, and a broad view of the bluffs along a great bend in the river that the road paralleled, where he would often stop. If no one else was there, he would sit at one of the picnic tables to smoke a cigarette and sip from a half-pint bottle of rye whiskey that he brought with him to drink on the drive home. When he finished the cigarette, he would walk to the outcropping and crawl out to look down upon the river, slow-moving and wide. The outcropping was high above the water. Ted could see eddies near the pebbled river shore and sometimes large channel catfish seemingly stopped in the water. Ted generally spent a half hour at this place, even though it meant he wouldn't get home until well past 6. He would replay in his mind each thing his son did, from gurgling or crawling a few months ago to the few words he could say at 1 year. Every burp, each smile and sound, every grasp of the boy's hand around Ted's finger, the fumbling kisses on the cheek, all would move slowly and constantly across what seemed to Ted like a movie screen right behind his lower forehead. On this trip, his wife gave him a framed 5x7 black and white photograph of their son, taken at a photographer's studio a few weeks prior to this visit. The boy was standing, knees bent slightly as if trying to keep his balance, wearing a tan fisherman-style cap and striped short pant overalls, with white socks rolled down above shined black shoes. His jacket was tan and his white shirt had a rounded Peter Pan collar. Ted knew the colors of the outfit. His mother had sent it with him to give to his wife for the boy. The baby had an expression on his face that Ted couldn't quite figure out. It was somewhere between a gas-filled cry and a laugh. The boy's mouth was open and his eyes were squinting somewhat. As Ted smoked his cigarette, he wondered whether he would know any more about his son if he saw him every day. On this last Sunday before he moved away, Ted drank his whiskey quickly, finishing it at the rest stop, rather than sipping it along the drive home as he typically did. He felt flushed from the drink and began to feel tears welling up in his eyes. He shook for a moment, wiped his eyes with his hands, and threw the empty pint bottle toward the river. His throw was short and the bottle landed in a clump of grass next to a tree. Ted got up and walked unsteadily toward his car, almost staggering. After he got in the car and started the engine, he pushed a few of the radio's buttons to try to tune in a station. He wanted to hear the end of the ball game or some music, but he heard only static and lit another cigarette, which he rarely did inside his car. He loved the smell of the leather seats and the upholstery, which he kept swept and cleaned with a whisk broom that he stored in the glove box. The 3-year-old car looked as if it had just been driven off the showroom floor. It had a black exterior with red leather interior. He drove with the top down whenever possible, left arm dangling down against the car door, right hand alternating between the steering wheel and gear shifter on the steering column. When he walked into his office the next Monday morning, his secretary handed him the mail. The letter on top was from a law firm in his wife's hometown. He set it aside and opened the rest of his mail. He waited until the end of the day to open the letter from his wife's attorney. She wanted nothing more to do with him. He would not be welcome to her home any longer to see his son. Ted put on his jacket and walked out of the office, closing and locking the door behind him. The next morning, he went to the bank, withdrew his savings, closed his accounts. He drove to his house, took the bag that he had packed the night before, locked the house, and drove to his parents' home. His mother started crying softly when she saw him, and his father began screaming, cursing Ted's wife. Ted simply stood still. He walked to his mother, hugged her gently, and handed her the framed photo of his son, put his hand on his father's shoulder, and then turned away from them and walked out of the house. He had not said a word while he was there with them. Within a few years, Ted was remarried with a different son on his lap and another baby on the way. Once a month or so, he and his family would get in his car, which now was a beige 4-door sedan with automatic transmission and an FM radio, and drive the 4.5 hours to his hometown to visit his parents and brothers and sister and their families. His first son's photograph was on the mantel above the fireplace in the living room of his parents' house. He didn't look at it for any length of time while there. He asked his parents to move the photograph to somewhere in the house where his new family wouldn't see it. His mother would cry when he suggested it, and his father would scream at him and leave the house, coming back hours later, still red-faced and tight-lipped with rage. Ted wasn't angry anymore. Ted was almost happy. He liked his wife. He was very fond of his children. His new career kept him occupied for much of the day. It was all he could ask for, really. Thank you.
Welcome back to Waterline Writers. We have some great opportunities to tell you